Earlier this year, I read a wonderful sermon by one of our colleagues, Rabbi Zoe Klein. What she'd done was she'd gathered up a great many of the accounts shared by the people of Hawaii, who on January 13th at 8:07 a.m. received an emergency alert that a ballistic missile was on its way from North Korea, and that this was not a drill. It was 38 minutes before they were told that, in fact, this message was a false alarm. What do you think you would do in the face of what appeared to be an impending disaster? Feelings of fear, of acceptance, of hope that another day still might dawn for us? Rabbi Klein reflects on these questions with reference to a text in the Torah in Parshat Bo, where it describes the last of the 3 of the 10 plagues in Egypt: locusts, darkness, and the slaying of the firstborn. After God tells Moses what is going to happen to the firstborn and the great cry that will rise up from Egypt, the very next verse says, "This month shall be for you the head of months. It shall be for you the first of the months of the year." It's a rather strange segue, and the medieval commentator Rashi points out that the juxtaposition is that at the moment of greatest terror, when a cry will go up from the land, God is showing Moses the new moon. Rabbi Klein makes the connection with the new moon and feelings of hope at times of despair. She shares that some say that the miracle of Rosh Chodesh, when the new moon appears in the sky, is greater than the miracle of Hanukkah. On Hanukkah, hope was never totally lost. It was diminished. But once a month, the light goes out. Dead and gone. Hopeless. It used to be that at the very end of every month, people would put on sackcloth, and they called it a Yom Kippur Katan, a mini Yom Kippur. They fasted. There was no light. That's why the miracle of Rosh Chodesh is greater than the miracle of Hanukkah, because on Rosh Chodesh, hope rises like a phoenix, hope born out of nothing. It is the resurrection of possibility. So back to the people of Hawaii on January 13th. As you might imagine, the responses were extremely varied. Here are just a few. Some acted quickly, with an impulse to try and survive, tearing up manholes and lowering their children down, creating a bunker, filling up water canisters, gathering what food they had to hand. For some, they were inspired to share something important with others. In the case of a young man who came out as gay, he found that not everyone wanted to be the same kind of friend once it became clear it was a false alarm. But there were others who were there for him in ways that he couldn't have imagined, and he was so grateful to now be living out in the open. For others, that kind of confessional didn't go so well. A relative of someone who lived in Hawaii wrote, "My uncle and his family live in Hawaii. He's been cheating on his wife for 2 years. We all found out in a mass text he sent 5 minutes after the emergency text went out. He wanted to clear the air before he died." Oh dear. Many reached out to loved ones by phone or by text. Some let their families just sleep and then later regretted that they didn't wake them in order to have what could have been their last moments together. Others regretted that they did say something to their children about the alert, introducing a fear of something that they couldn't make better. Or others pretended that they could make them safe, gathering up food and important resources and going to the safest room in a flimsy beach house, which happened to be the bathroom, until they received the update that it was in fact a false alarm. There were many who just went about their routine. One had breakfast on his lanai as usual. A young woman rolled out of bed and told her boyfriend, "How about I make us one last cup of coffee before we die. And they proceeded to the kitchen to brew a small pot. She said that all she wanted was one last time to do her favorite things, sit and talk stories with him and with coffee in the morning. She said maybe it wasn't so impulsive, but there was something about it being perhaps the last time ever to do that. And so the stories went on. In the moment of impending disaster, the human response was so varied. And what people might have said they would do if they were to find themselves in such a situation is not always the same as what they actually did in this scenario. So even asking ourselves the question, we can't truly know who we would be in the story unless we found ourselves there. While nuclear bombs were going, while nuclear bomb alarms were going off in Hawaii, I was actually in Colorado at exactly the same time at a rabbinic conference, and I was learning with Rabbi Shai Held, who teaches at an adult learning institute in New York City called Hadar. And with example after example from our Jewish texts, he presented a remarkable thesis that demonstrated how, for centuries, we Jews have had a kind of spiritual response to disaster or impending disaster that has infused even the darkest moments in our history with hope. If we go back to the Exodus story, when the children of Israel find themselves pinned in between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army, Moses instructs them, don't be afraid. Maimonides actually posits that do not fear is one of the 613 commandments in the Torah. He says we are to be in awe only with regard to God, but we should not act or fail to act out of fear. Rabbi Held examined some of the most pivotal moments in the texts of our tradition. Take, for example, the destruction of the first temple. As we get to the final verses of 2 Kings, one might expect the story to end with the destruction of the kingdom of Judea, the exile of the king, and the leaders of the Jewish people to Babylonia. But then there's a few extra verses right at the very end of the book that provides this addendum. In the 37th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin of Judah, on the 27th day of the 12th month, King Evil-Merodach of Babylon, in the year he became king, took note of King Jehoiachin of Judah and released him from prison. He spoke kindly to him and gave him a throne above those of other kings who were with him in Babylon. His prison garments were removed, and King Jehoiachin received regular rations by his favor for the rest of his life. A regular allotment of food was given to him by the king, an allotment for each day, all the days of his life. Why at the very end, fast forward 37 years into the future? Because the authors wanted to offer us, the readers, a glimmer of hope. Not a miracles and wonders, supernatural kind of hoping, something that was more modest and realistic, something that demonstrates that even after the greatest disaster to have befallen the Jewish people at that moment in our history, there was the possibility that something new might still emerge, and we shouldn't give up hope that we would forever be lost in the despair of the destruction. But the kind of spiritual teachings offered by our tradition are not simplistic or naive. We can't simply say, do not fear, or do not despair, and have it be so. Our spiritual wisdom text confronts us with the human emotions of fear and despair and acknowledges to us that they are real. The book of Lamentations is literally filled with the lamenting for the loss of the temple, and yet, even in the midst of a whole book dedicated to the woe and expressions of feeling abandoned by God, we also find verses like this. I thought my strength and hope had perished before the eternal. But this do I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The kindness of the eternal has not ended. God's mercies are not spent. They are renewed every morning. Ample is your grace. The eternal is my portion. I say with full heart, therefore will I hope in God. The author of these lamentations, even in the midst of loss, holds on to a faith that nothing stays the same forever. If God is eternal, then kindness and mercy may still be experienced in the future. Simply waking up to another morning is an act of grace, something that is simply given without cause, providing the possibility that a moment of kindness or a turn of events might unfold, giving the author hope. The book of Psalms offers us a mirror in which we see every kind of human emotion expressed. Don't hide your face from me when we feel lost and abandoned. Out of the depths I call to you. They don't try to justify the pain. They don't offer us a simplistic theology like God can only give you what you can handle, or there must be a reason for this. The pain and the loss is fully expressed, but so is the yearning for a new day to dawn. Out of the ashes, hope rises like a phoenix. Perhaps no greater expression of this Jewish spiritual yearning, transforming despair into hope, are the words that became the anthem of the Jewish people, Hatikva. The song existed long before the modern state of Israel came into being. Naftali Hertz Imber wrote the first version of the poem in 1878, following the establishment of one of the early Zionist settlements in Palestine, Petach Tikva. To understand the power of these words of hope, I encourage you when you are home to listen to a YouTube where you can hear a recording of the sounds of the survivors of Bergen-Belsen singing this anthem at a Shabbat service at that concentration camp shortly after liberation. As long as in the heart, within, a Jewish soul still yearns, and onward towards the ends of the east, an eye still looks towards Zion, our hope is not yet lost, the ancient hope to return to the land of our fathers, the city where David encamped. There's another response to despair, and that is protest. Abraham is held up as our righteous ancestor because he would not accept the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah if there were even a handful of righteous people who would suffer. There's a midrash that describes him as seeing a beautiful castle on fire. He cries out in disbelief that someone would let such a palace burn and not try to put out the fire. That is the moment that God decides, Abraham's the guy for me. The palace is an allegory for our community, our country, our world. Saying that this is not the way things are meant to be suggests that we believe in another order by which standards should be set. And so when we respond in protest, we, like Abraham, are demanding that a better way to deal with the issues of our time must exist. And like Abraham, it's not enough to simply protest. We have to offer our ideas. We have to actively engage in supporting the alternative visions that are put forth by others. We have to vote. Fear, despair. Each of us experiences these emotions in our lives. Life takes an unexpected turn and we feel lost without a map. We find ourselves facing a reality that we would never have chosen and cannot, in that moment, imagine how we would ever be in a different, better place. Something happens, and we are reminded that we are never really fully in control in the first place, and that is frightening. We find ourselves despairing of the acts of cruelty that we witness. We hear rhetoric that causes us to fear for ourselves or for our neighbors. I lift my eye to the mountains. From where will my help come? We, the Jewish people, we have known fear and despair. We have known loss. We have known pain. But time and time again, we hear holy words, God's words, that call upon us not to despair, calling upon us to act, calling upon us to hope. Time and time again, we are reminded that we have been here before, and we have the spiritual resilience to keep going. When the kingdom of Judah fell and the temple was destroyed in 586 BCE, despair was not given the last word in the books of Kings. Despair did not have the last word then, and we must not let it have the last word today. Thinking back to that false alarm that came early one January morning in Hawaii, I wonder in self-reflection at my own thoughts, were I to receive such an alert, a warning that disaster was impending, facing the realities of who I am, measuring my deeds and my ways. Am I in despair? Or in being awake to the truth and reality that is unfolding before me, do I choose hope that I can still do better, that I can still rise higher, that I can do more to right the wrongs that I see in my own life and the world around me? We never know what tomorrow might bring, but we have these choices each and every day. Yom Kippur is only here to sound the alarm, reminding us that whatever happens next, let us be inspired, not to despair, but to hope, and from that place of hope, to act.